to claim full attribution in one ways, that would be great, wouldn't it? Thank you very much for the opportunity to present here today. Grant's done a great job of introducing me. Although I've only been with the SMI for about 4 months now, I think. I worked alongside the SMI for the 15 years that I've been here in Australia, really. Working from CSRO, but very much admiring the work that the SMI has done and the capability that it's got in technology areas, in the social sciences, and in thinking about environmental stewardship. What I want to do today, I've come in to SMI. I think I'm of all centres, or none, one of the two, I'm not quite sure really. So, because I've come in to start developing one of the cross-cutting programs that SMI is putting in place as part of a strategy around integration and collaboration for the future. So I want to, first of all, start off thinking a little bit about what could the future be like, and then talk a bit about SMI and put that in context with where the university is going, where the industry might be going, and then come down and talk more specifically about some of the initiatives that are shaping up within the Transforming Mine Lifecycle program. The presentation won't be much like the other presentations that I so enjoy on Friday morning here. It's not a deep technical presentation. What I'm trying to do is stand on top of this rock and say these are some of the things that we can see. The question is, how do we then position ourselves to be able to sort of navigate the changeable and dynamic landscape of the 21st century. So I'll talk a little bit first about megatrends working in the 21st century. What I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about is the thing we all know, which is the more from less story about a planet under pressure. Global population growth driving increasing demand and stresses on how we produce food to feed our global population, where we get the energy to support the population, and how do we work with our scarce and precious environmental resources, in particular water. We know this story. You know, I could do an hour presentation on this, but I'm not going to. I think any of you could probably do an hour's presentation on this. We also know that this is a story that's driving the continued need for resources. So this is the story that tells us that we do need new resources. We're going to continue to need new resources. And it's going to tell us the kind of resources that we need. We've already seen a shift now to understanding where we're going to get our supply of lithium, how we're going to handle potential shortages in copper. So this story tells us what we need to mine. What we spend slightly less time talking about are the things that are happening in the world that are beginning to tell us how we need to mine, because that is changing. I put up here the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, because for me they kind of are symbolic, if you like, of our global aspirations for humanity. And these are strengthening. The Sustainable Development Goals are stronger than the Millennium Development Goals were. There's a lot of time spent thinking about how does the industry align with these SDGs. And Catherine Sturman from CSRM, she's already doing a piece of work that's looking at how all the various certification schemes in the industry help to promote outcomes that align with the Sustainable Development Goals. These global aspirations are beginning to influence what we do and how we do it, and will begin to influence how we mine to a greater extent than we're currently seeing them influence it at the moment. Part of the reason for that is because the global connectivity that we have now is actually allowing new voices to be heard in the major public debates. So I've put a couple of examples up here. Donald Trump maybe wouldn't have got to become president of the USA without the level of global connectivity and the use he makes of social media. The second picture up here is Lara Burt. She was the first person to coin the idea of Me Too, about people talking about sexual abuse, which again became a movement that was on Time magazine as the Person of the Year this year. And finally, of course, the movement that's seen diversity and gay marriage become acceptable in more and more jurisdictions. Again, it's been facilitated by greater global connectivity. In the minerals industry, what that global connectivity is doing, it's enabling us to hold the industry to account. And the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative is probably one of the most well-known of those systems that are now enabled by ability to connect to data, to connect to people, and to understand what people are doing to lift the lid on the box. So what we're actually seeing is there are some bold moves happening in the marketplace. Again, it's difficult to attribute direct cause and effect here, but the picture up there of Larry Fink, he's the CEO of BlackRock, which is the largest capital investment firm, one of the big investors into mineral plays. And he released a letter in Christmas this year telling minerals companies that they needed to really think about their social strategy and their long-term responses to risks such as wage growth, climate adaptation, if they wanted to be credible for capital investment because they have a sustainable business. Elysis is a company's joint venture that's just been established between Apple and Rio, I think Alcoa may be in there as well, to produce zero-emission aluminium. Now, probably we're all sitting here going zero-emission aluminium, wow, how's that going to happen? I also think the fact that Apple and Rio have got into bed together is equally noteworthy. And it speaks to this idea that there is a growing demand for what's becoming known as extended producer responsibility. So consumers want to know that right down the supply chain that leads to their product, there is responsible business happening. And then finally, something that Deanna pointed out to me earlier on, which again is a very noteworthy thing, that Rio divested itself of its Australian coal assets this year. Now, I always have a little cynic sitting in the corner over there on my shoulder. And they'll probably say, well, Rio did that so that they can get investment from the people in BlackRock who don't want to invest in high emission technologies. But again, the point is, Rio made that move. Rio made that move in order to attract investment. The investment markets are moving in order to attract the funds from the superannuation that they get to play with. This is actually quite big things happening here, but they're happening without much commentary at the moment. Also, we know that the industry is highly innovative, and certainly here at JKMRC, this is me portraying to you guys the level of innovation that's going on in the marketplace at the moment as the drive for continued productivity and efficiency goes on, and the digital revolution really takes hold. But what we don't always think about are the perhaps more unforeseen consequences of those technological developments, nor do we necessarily think of how disruptive they can potentially be. I'll put a quote up here from Monty Metzger. You may or may not know who Monty Metzger is. If you're a tech head, you probably do know who he is. He's the CEO of something called Liechtenstein Cryptocurrency. He's one of the Silicon Valley's tech billionaires who's working on the use of blockchain in various dimensions. And what he said here is blockchain is to the money what email is to the letter. And if that's true, there's a huge implication here. How often do you write a letter now? We all know money makes the world go round. If it's not going to be money that makes the world go round, if it's going to be blockchain, then that's a big difference. And we're in danger of handing over control to those people who happen to know how blockchain works, which I don't. It's pretty vague to me. But there's a big thing happening here, I think, about the way we understand transactions on a global scale between multiple different organisations and institutions. And the last thing I just wanted to suggest we need to think about in terms of potentially it's going to impact how we mine is very complex and different relationships that are now developing if we do connect differently. So the sign up here for Amazon and Amazon Prime is really just a trigger for me to talk a bit about the on-demand world. You know, the idea that, Paul, if you decide you want to have something for dinner tonight, you could just pick out your phone now, email it, and it'll be delivered to you when you want it. You don't have to go to the store. You can just say, I want it, get it, and have it delivered, which is creating huge change in our high streets, as we all know. It's also changing, the mobile phone is also changing the way we connect with each other. I went online to try and get an image of just the number of, I mean, the data and the number of people in India who own a mobile phone is enormous now, and the rate of uptake is huge. But actually, I came up, when I went on to get that, it was going to be just an image to prompt me to talk about it. I found this article, which is actually saying that there's a real gender gap going around mobile phone ownership in India, because as young women get to adolescence, they're being refused access to mobile phones because of cultural concerns around, you know, chastity and control. So again, an unforeseen consequence of a technology that most people would see as enabling our society. So coming back to where I started, nobody's questioning that resources have a role to play. This is some data that was published earlier on this year by Tom Gradle and his team at Yale University. And they modelled 4 scenarios of projecting demand for these commodities down the right-hand side. And if you take zinc, which is the orange bar, the top line is the high demand scenario, the bottom line is the low demand scenario. The grey bar in the middle is if you were to take all the reserves that are known at the moment and develop them using current technology and put recycling on top of that, that's with uncertainty bars, that's the amount of resource that we feel is circulating in the world today. So you can see some fairly significant gaps in there. What I found really interesting about this work is that the high demand scenario was the scenario that they developed to reflect how much resource would be needed to deliver against the Sustainable Development Goals. So we want to achieve what we want to achieve in terms of our global aspirations. That's our high demand scenario for resources, and we often don't draw that connection. The low demand scenario was one which was based, interestingly, on resource security and nationality, so people were shutting the borders to the export of their commodities. So, if I want to move on, it's the case for we're going to need resources, I feel, is solid. How we develop them is a really interesting question to explore. And I want to turn now just to a little bit of work that Rick and his team in the Complex Ore Bodies program have been developing over the last year. So, and this is the Complex Ore Bodies database. And they started with a question which is, can a simple price rise unlock undeveloped copper deposits? And I don't have figures, but Rick's sitting here so he can answer any detailed questions. Billions of dollars in the ground of undeveloped copper deposits. And then they started putting together a new kind of deposit database to try and understand what are the risks associated with developing these undeveloped copper deposits. And they took the sort of traditional resource development resource productivity approach. Let's look at location, size, grade, economics, and then we added added in a number of indicators that allude to some of the constraints, some of the issues that tend not to get dealt with as a primary consideration, but they're dealt with as a secondary consideration, as a management of risk around the outside. And they put together this is a complicated diagram, but it shows where they're going with copper. But in all of these different areas, you have very different risks taking a greater or a lesser part. Now, this is not telling you anything you don't know. So we know that Chile, one of the problems of water. We know that in Africa, thinking about artisanal and small-scale mining facilities, this is the first time that I have seen a data-driven representation of the range of risks that have to be managed as you mine. And the issue for me with this is the question of, okay, if that's the range of risk, how do you actually manage them in terms of the mining process, and what does that mean in terms of how you mine? Because there's more here than just worrying about grade. There's issues here about worrying about how you develop livelihoods for small-scale miners. How do you share access to water when it's a scarce resource? How do you handle land access? Which suggests that maybe we should be thinking very hard about how all of those happen as we go into the mining process, not once we've decided to mine. Which brings me on to, I think there are a number of really quite complex questions out there, and we need to think carefully about how we're going to answer them. And the joy of being a place like the sustainable minerals industry or any university environment is that these are the kind of questions that we're expected to ask and wrestle with. So this is my way of, I suppose, caricaturing the situation that I see we have coming out of the 20th century. We're not quite sure at the moment who's in the ascendancy and whose risk we're worrying about, whose benefit we're worrying about. And on the one hand, you have the car driver who just wants to get to the store as efficiently and effectively as possible and will contribute to the market economy by buying whatever it is he's going to buy. And on the right-hand side, you've got the bicyclist who kind of understands that there are a whole load of additional benefits that can come when one starts riding the bicycle, but he's not going to get there very quickly. So we've got a real tension between two ways of thinking about transport here. And I think that's what we're experiencing in the resources sector at the moment. And this is where, as I say, it's great to be in a research environment where those questions can be asked. And more particularly, it's great to be in a research environment in the SMI where the range of disciplines and capability available means that you can actually ask those questions and have some chance of making progress towards answers. But of course, the SMI is actually only a small part of the university. There are other people in the university that do a lot of work in the resources sector. And then of course there are people outside the university, and a lot of the university strategy is around collaboration, global growth, global reach. And so one of the things that the SMI has been doing as part of its strategy going forward is thinking about how do we encourage a culture of cooperation and collaboration and integration. And that for me is the purpose of the cross-cutting programs. And 4 of them have been initiated and are gaining traction at the moment. And the aim of these cross-cutting programs is not only to assess with integration within the centres, but also integration and collaboration into the university and then out to other research partners. What's really interesting is that each of these programs is addressing highly integrated questions. So Brit's program, which has a lot of traction and has been kind of working now for a year, really a lot of shape to it. It's not just about complex ore bodies in terms of geological complexity and heterogeneity. It's about the complexity of the environment in which new supply has to be generated. So all the other factors that will affect our ability to deliver new supply. Osen leads the Digital Mining Cross-Cutting Programme. It's not just about how do we use artificial intelligence, remote teleoperation and automation and machine learning to be more productive and efficient, but it's also thinking about what cognitive skills do we need to operate in that kind of environment. What are the implications of this for people whose livelihoods have traditionally depended on driving trucks, for example? And transforming the mine life cycles is not just about finding, mining and refining, it's actually about how do we mine and who do we need to talk to mine for best effect in the 21st century. So let's talk a bit about mine life cycle. In the 20th century, it was pretty much find, mine and refine, critical point in there around approval, and then regulation kind of kept everyone honest. Particularly after the publication of mining minerals and sustainable development, and as the kind of connectivity that is embedded in the kind of industrial internet has come through, we've realised that actually the mining life cycle is more of a series of reflexive and iterative feedback loops. And what happens in one place impacts on what happens in another place. But it's still essentially the same process. As we move forward, we've been encouraged, back to the war on waste, to think much more about the circular economy, something that's much less linear, much more circular, involved. Sometimes it's called the regenerative economy. So anything that you produce as waste is looked at very hard in terms of how that can then be used to continue to add value going on. And for the mining industry, I think that has, again, big implications. This is a linear representation of the kind of things you might do to generate a very sustainable mining industry. But by the time you sort of bring in the ideas of sustainable production, blurring the boundaries between production and manufacturing, use, design, and recycling, you start to get much more complicated at the tail end of the mining life cycle. And that's really where the Transforming Mine Life Cycles programme is looking to operate, because to start thinking about the moment, the idea of closure and restoration, the future obligations of a mine, heavily discounted when you think about the early stages of valuation. The opportunities in delivering multiple value streams off a mine site are often neglected when you're thinking about the prime purpose of a mine, which may be to produce copper or lithium. So how do you actually get some of the thinking about this complicated back end much more embedded in how you design, construct and operate and close a mine? So this quite complicated diagram here is the one pager of how the Transforming Mine Life Cycles programme is developing. The top line is really what I've just been through, that to meet the demand of the future, we've got changing expectations. We need to think a bit differently about how we mine. And following the consultation that I've been doing since I've been here at SMI, it seemed to be coalescing into 5 thematic areas for this programme to go forward. And I'll be going through each of them in turn, but just briefly, it's actually about understanding the changing context for mining, asking some of those difficult questions. Having asked them, what does that mean for the way we plan a mine and what we value as we go through the mining process? When we're mining, how do we understand and manage that mine for an operational impact that is fairly and equitably distributed, not just to the organisation that's doing the mining, but to all of those who are affected by it. And do we have the right institutions to sort of to govern that? And then at the back end, a huge issue around, can we stop producing so much waste? And then at the end of the mine, thinking about, oh my God, how are we going to handle all this waste? Can we actually start thinking about multiple value streams off the mine side? That means we end up with less waste at the end of the journey. And finally, of course, the issue around closure, legacy and succession, which is beginning to loom very large on a number of agendas at the moment, as some of the mines that have been operating for a long while are looking to closure. So that's kind of summary of the Mine Lifecycle programme. I'm just now going to run through some of the initiatives that we've initiated under this programme. And these are really the areas, the invitation here is to get involved. If you have research that I'm not aware of that is relevant here, then feel free to buttonhole me and tell me about it. I've done my best to sort of understand a wide range of activities within SMI and the university, but I'm sure it's not completely comprehensive. Theme one is about changing context for mining, and we're certainly shaped that around the idea of the circular economy. Glenn and his team have a lot of experience in that space, particularly working through the wealth from waste cluster. So, critically, what we're looking at here is what's going to stress the mining paradigm over the next 20 years. The idea of how we transform our perspectives on waste is a big area that is ripe for consideration at the moment. I was at the Life of Mine conference, and sorry about my voice, it's very weird to listen to me. I was at the Life of Mine conference, and a number of presentations in there where people were talking about how much value could be unlocked if you thought differently about waste and tailings in particular. But the other aspect of the changing context for mining is really thinking in a very sophisticated way about who wins and who loses. And that needs to be done in the context of cultural differences. This is a picture of some ladies in Madagascar where there are interesting landholdership patterns around, women own the land, but men get to debate how the lease gets used. That sort of raises all kinds of issues about how do you actually ensure a fair return for handing over a right to mine to someone. The approach here, though, this is not a big investment. Well, this is an area where SMI does huge amounts already. Asking questions, finding answers, being a thought leader, working with some of the key peak bodies around the globe. So this is an area where I think we're already doing great stuff. So we can improve our marketing of it. The second two is around planning and valuation. And this, for me, this is a huge area of research. They say that 80% of your value is planned in your initial mine design. And once you've done that design, it's very difficult to change anything because so much capital investment has gone in on site. You've made decisions about where your waste stops are going to be, how large they're going to be, what kind of system you're going to use. And the cost to change any of that is very high, which means it becomes very difficult to sort of all of a sudden put in new systems. And you see this all the time in the technology and innovation space. I've worked in CSRO on a system for coagulating contaminants out of pit lakes and tailings lakes that in the long run will be cheaper and involve less water, have all kinds of benefits than the current use of lime. But of course, mainly on the mine, you've already put the lime in as part of your design. So there's not very much incentive to change when new technology comes in. So one of the things we're looking at is how can multiple and varying values be incorporated into the mine planning process, and how different would the mine look as a result of that? And this is something where, very much working with Mining 3, that's a question that we really want to start getting into and understanding. The approach we've got comes in two ways. Just today I'm submitting with Professor Peter Knight from the School of Mining. We're telling the university that we're interested in going for an ARC transformational training hub on mine design for sustainability, which will look at some of these things. And also, I've been working with Marcin and Grant and Chris Gregg from the UQ Energy Initiative and Dow Centre and Mining 3 about thinking about what would be the way that we could think about decarbonising the mine. So those two ideas are the ones that have been gaining traction in this space about how could we mine differently, and what would a mine look like if we did mine differently. The third area is really around understanding operational impact, distribution and fairness. And this is really, so there's long been a conversation about how resource extraction can be an agent for positive transition in developing countries. A lot of work is being done in this area, and CSRM are leading the field in that space. The question here is really what can we do to really sort of encourage that work to get embedded into the way we run and operate mines. It does link to the planning area, all of these things link to each other. Because, for example, in some places, much more modular and flexible mining might be much more appropriate to the stage of development of a country than putting in a huge processing plant. So, a lot of work to be done here. We've got a really good basis to build from. And what we're trying to do is to build a global consortium of researchers interested in working in this space. So we've had a couple of meetings with particularly the University of Exeter, University of British Columbia and the University of Cape Town, because this really is an area that's beginning to build on the vision that I think Dee Bradshaw had about a much more integrated thinking about technology, cultural development and environmental stewardship. I don't know where this area is going to go. It's the very early stages of formulation, but I encourage you to join in some of the conversations as we go forward. Looking forward about transforming perspectives on waste, and there's a huge opportunity here, and again in the Environment Centre there's already a lot of work going on in a number of these areas, but the way we're taking this forward is actually at the moment through a bid for a CRC. And CRC would be called, if it's successful, Achieving Sustainable Mine Closure. It's not the best name, but it's a name. That bid has gone into round one. We're expecting to hear fairly soon as to whether that's got through to round two. So we started, beginning to gear up to continue our industry consultation for round two. Now, Current CRC is working through 4 programs. Policy harmonisation and community engagement. There's a lot that we could do in that space. It's currently being led by Fiona Hasler-Mackenzie out of Curtin University. And I've quite consciously done that because I think we need to let that settle before we understand how best we can bring in the research that SMI does around social responsibility into that space. Intelligent information systems and design tools. That's a program that we've got leadership of. And that's an area which is really about how do you build the information flows necessary in order to really effectively manage waste through the mining process. So for me, there's stuff in there about understanding the geometallurgy of what's going through your processing plant, because that's going to determine what kind of issues you're going to have in your tailings. Probably if you're a process engineer, you know all of this. How do we factor that into thinking about waste management systems. That's the kind of question that Intelligent Information Systems Programme is looking at. Smart waste is about alternative uses for waste, and again, Mansour Idraki is strongly assisting in that programme. So a lot of the stuff he's done around design of waste fits in there. And finally, the Biodiversity Institute of Western Australia is leading a programme around rehabilitation and succession. And again, there's a lot that we can contribute in that space. So that's quite exciting, or at least it'll be exciting when it gets through to round 2. And then finally, the theme around closure, succession and legacy. This is sort of addressed in the CRC, but not, I think, to the extent that it could be addressed by the kind of capability here at SMI. And so this actually is the area where I think there's a case for us to, subject to Neville's approval, asking the university for some strategic funding for some senior appointments, because we have so much capability in SMI that could be put towards this issue of closure. But it's so busy at the moment, it's really difficult to see how you can actually divert somebody and get the attention necessary to really claim leadership in this space around closure. Another aspect that's being looked at here, Mansour in particular, and Glenn, we're having a number of conversations about whether we can pull together industry, government and researchers within Queensland to start looking at Queensland as an exemplar, if you like, of really, really good closure examples. So I'm just going to wind up now. Projects. So it's kind of the project portfolio that's emerging. If it's green, it's in progress. I've only got one green spot here at the moment. So, you know, you can see that there's an emergent project grouping here, and hopefully soon we'll start gaining some traction in the programme. And the idea is that these projects will actually sit in, they'd be led by the appropriate centre. So that these projects are not something that sits outside of centres, they're something that are led through the centre, but as part of this coordination through Transform the Mine Lifecycle. But for me, a lot of what we're doing here, and a lot of where SMI is one of the best positioned institutes I've seen, is actually about sort of trying to get conversations going between often, I think Tony Hodge would call them storytellers and bean counters. And I like this diagram because it kind of shows how wildly different you can be when you're talking about the same thing. But it also gives me a bit of hope, because I personally like rugby. And I think maybe we can develop a new game of rugby if we can get these conversations going. Thank you very much.